have said, let's make it easier to vote and harder to cheat so that we protect the integrity of this system, so that we eliminate fraud, and so we preserve confidence in our election results. Well, it is just nonsensical that our colleagues across the aisle oppose this. Can you imagine that? 83% of the American people say, you're right, let's show an ID, let's be a citizen if we're going to vote. But no, our Democrat colleagues oppose it. They want to make it easier for non-citizens to cast ballots. In fact, 14 states in this country, and by the way, these are overwhelmingly blue states, 14 states do not require any documentation whatsoever to go cast your vote. Can you imagine that? You just walk up, claim to be somebody, and you vote. But you look at states like California and New York, which are home to more than 3.5 million illegal aliens combined, and that's what you're seeing, making it easier to cheat, making it easier for non-citizens to vote. You know, I think that you look at these issues and you realize that our friends across the aisle, Mr. President, they might have been picking the wrong fight. People want DHS funded. They want the Save America Act passed. They want the integrity of our elections to be protected. And I think it is imperative that we come together on this floor and that we pass the Save America Act and make certain that we know who is voting and that they are a citizen. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Texas.
Mr. President, later this year, American citizens across the country will exercise one of their most valuable and sacred rights, the right to vote. A right that has been hard-earned and fought for from the founding generation of our republic to today. And how was the right to self-government, the right to vote, secured? It was secured by American colonists who rejected the royal edict and hurled tea into Boston Harbor, declaring no taxation without representation. It was secured by ordinary men who seized their muskets and fired the shot heard round the world at Lexington and Concord. It was secured by Continental troops who marched to the fields of Saratoga and the coastline of Yorktown, repeating those immortal words of Patrick Henry, "Give me liberty or give me death." For nearly 250 years, Americans have cast their votes for leaders at every level, from local officials to state representatives to the President of the United States. Every member of this body is here today because we were elected fairly and honestly, and given a mandate by our constituents to serve them here in Washington and to protect the liberties and freedoms our founders fought to preserve. The power of the ballot box determines the course of our nation, the history we are writing, and the freedoms that we continue to defend. And while no single ballot in isolation may seem decisive, together, the votes of the American people shape the course of our nation and the course of history. But it is worth remembering that our voting system did not begin as it exists today. When this nation was founded, the right to vote was limited, and over time, through debate, sacrifice, a bloody civil war, and constitutional amendment, the right to vote was quite properly expanded. The 15th Amendment prohibited denying the vote based on race. The 19th Amendment guaranteed women the right to vote. And the 26th Amendment lowered the voting age to 18. At every stage of our constitutional amendment process, the goal was the same: to ensure that the right to vote belonged to American citizens and that it was exercised with integrity. And while our system has evolved, one principle has remained constant. Elections reflect the will of the American people. For a right so sacred, for a privilege so hard fought, it is shocking, it is tragic, how neglected and vulnerable the protection of our elections has become. That is why I'm here today on this very floor, urging the members of this body to pass the Save America Act. It says that when you register to vote in a federal election, you must provide proof that you are a citizen of the United States, and you must provide photo ID to vote. In simple terms, that's it. This is not some radical, politicized, or weaponized piece of legislation designed to restrict Americans from voting. It is a common sense measure that protects the integrity of our elections by ensuring that American citizens and only American citizens are voting in them. Legitimacy in a democracy rests on two pillars. First, the mechanical integrity of the system to produce a valid result, and second, the public's confidence in that system. If either one fails, the system falters. If both fail, the system collapses. A system that cannot be trusted is a system that cannot govern. If you look around the world, between 2/3 and 3/4 of countries require some form of identification to vote. Why? Because it safeguards the integrity of their elections and reinforces public trust in their system. So it begs the question, why hasn't the United States fully embraced this standard? Well, for the last several months, we have heard claim after claim about how this legislation would somehow inhibit people from voting, that requiring identification is discriminatory, that the American people do not support voter ID. Mr. President, our Democrat colleagues are fond of bellowing into the TV cameras that photo ID to vote is Jim Crow. They tell us with mock earnestness. Now, I will admit, our Democrat colleagues should be experts in Jim Crow, because it was Democrat politicians who passed the Jim Crow laws. It was Democrat politicians who founded the Ku Klux Klan. It was Democrat politicians for decade after decade who enforced discrimination, separate but equal, poll taxes, and a host of other laws designed to prevent African Americans from voting. But do you know who has rejected their disingenuous claim that photo ID to vote is Jim Crow? The Supreme Court of the United States. Supreme Court of the United States, the state of Indiana, passed photo ID law requiring that you show a photo ID to vote. And a group of left-wing plaintiffs filed litigation challenging that. The case went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. At the time, I was the Solicitor General of the state of Texas. I led a coalition of states before the Supreme Court defending photo ID to vote. And the left-wing plaintiffs made the same argument that our Democrat colleagues make today, that requiring photo ID to vote would somehow disenfranchise minorities. The Supreme Court, by a vote of 6-3, rejected their argument. The author of the majority opinion was John Paul Stevens. John Paul Stevens was one of the great liberals on the court. He was not a conservative. He was not on the right wing. He was the leading liberal for years on the U.S. Supreme Court. He rejected that claim And he pointed out that when someone votes illegally, they are stealing the votes of legal voters. They are stealing the votes of American citizens. The Supreme Court explained that when photo ID laws have been implemented, minority participation in the election goes up, not down. And the Supreme Court explained that requiring photo ID enhances the integrity of an election and the integrity of democracy. Now, our Democrat colleagues don't want to acknowledge any of those facts. And I guess it's understandable, because the American people have heard their specious arguments and they have rejected them. Mr. President, 81% of Americans support requiring photo ID to vote. But my Democrat colleagues might say, what about African Americans? Well, about 3/4 of African Americans in the United States support requiring photo ID to vote. How about Hispanics? More than 80% of Hispanics in America support requiring photo ID to vote. How about Democrats? Here's an astonishing statistic. If you get out of elected office, if you ask a Democrat on the street, 70% of Democrats in America support requiring photo ID to vote. The one group that doesn't are elected Democrats in the United States Senate and the United States House. And by the way, the premise of their argument that minorities, if you require photo ID to vote, are not going to be able to vote is frankly insulting. Mr. President, I'm proud to be an Hispanic American. I've been an Hispanic all my life. You know what I've got in my wallet? I have a driver's license. I look at my colleagues across the way. I feel confident they have driver's licenses in their wallets as well. Hispanics are not morons. African Americans are not morons. And when you claim minorities can't figure out how to get a driver's license, well, gosh, what do you need a photo ID to vote to do right now in America? You need a photo ID to purchase alcohol or to purchase tobacco. You need a photo ID to gamble or purchase lottery tickets. You need a photo bar. You need a photo ID to get on a plane. You need a photo ID to rent a car. You need a photo ID just to drive a car, not even rent a car, drive a car. You need a photo ID to apply for government benefits. You need a photo ID to enroll in college. You need a photo ID to open a bank account. You need a photo ID to check into a hotel. And I got to admit, this is my personal favorite. You need a photo ID, actually 2 photo IDs, to shovel snow in New York City. These are routine, everyday activities. The gallery is full. I feel confident everyone in the gallery who is not a child has a driver's license. And by the way, you wouldn't be admitted to the gallery if you didn't. And I feel confident every member of this chamber has done just about anything I listed well, except shoveling snow. I'm not convinced many of my colleagues have shoveled snow. Although they do shovel other things. The question is not whether Americans are bright enough to obtain photo ID. We know they can, and we know they do. The real question is, why would we not require the same level of verification for something as consequential and vital as voting? Are our Democrat colleagues saying voting doesn't matter? Or is it something else? Voting is not just another everyday activity. It rolls around every year, a few years, and it is the vehicle that protects the principles of our republic and safeguarding what matters. This legislation is necessary because there are individuals and systems that can undermine confidence in our elections. During the Biden administration, more than 12 million illegal immigrants flooded into. They have a difficult time getting on an airplane. Well, yes, because the Democrats have refuses to fund the TSA, and so there are long lines right now. But the lack of a photo ID is not an impediment that stops people from flying. This debate is about something very simple. Do our elections matter? Does our democracy matter? And boy, Mr. President, I got to say, that is a phrase the Democrats love, that they are defending democracy. It's interesting, their voice usually drops an octave when they say that. They clutch their pearls, and that's just the men. Defending democracy is what they say. Ask yourself, why are they not concerned at all about 12 million illegals who they let into this country voting illegally? I'll submit, Occam's razor provides the simplest solution is usually the right one. The simplest solution is very clear. The Democrats in this body want illegals to vote for them. They want power enough that they are more than happy to undermine democracy to try to seize power. I get that from their personal self-interest, but it is not in the interest of the men and women they represent. It is not in the interest of the people of America. This bill is rightly called the Save America Act. And Mr. President, if we were voting on the merits of what was good for America, what was good for democracy, what was good for American citizens, the vote would be 100-0. Although I would note on the other side of this building at the State of the Union address that you were at, that I was at, we saw why our Democrat colleagues are so adamantly opposed to this bill. President Trump turned to the Democrats on the right side of the floor of the House, and it gave them an opportunity to demonstrate with absolute clarity. He said, if you agree, our first priority should be to fight for American citizens and not for illegal aliens. Please stand. And every single Democrat in Congress remained seated. Not a one of them. I would note, as we're on the floor today, of the 47 Democrats in this body, only one is here on the floor. But a whole lot more were on the floor during the State of the Union. Every one of them chose to remain seated because they could not support the statement that we need to support American citizens and not illegal aliens. That's why they oppose the Save America Act, because they want to be handed power over this country by the illegal aliens they let into this country. That's why we need to save America. And it's why I urge every member of this body to pass the Save America Act. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Florida.
Mr. President, I rise today to speak about something that unifies our country. Here in the Senate, often we talk about things that we disagree on. We're going to talk today about something that Americans agree on. The American people overwhelmingly want election security. They want our border to be secure. They want our election to be secure. They want to feel that their government is acting with integrity and fairness, and to have representative government that protects its people. I rise in support of the Save America Act. For many of us, this is a new fight. My good friend Senator Lee and I have been working to pass the Save America Act for years, because we know this isn't just about election security, it's about protecting the future of our nation for all American families. The Save America Act is very simple. First, you need an ID to vote. Second, you need proof of citizenship to register in our elections. These aren't controversial ideas. In fact, the vast majority of Americans, no matter their party affiliation, their race, their gender, you name it, they support these ideas. And why wouldn't they? Americans want to know that our elections are both free and fair, that our democracy is safe. They believe in our country and that its citizens can make good decisions. They want to know that their vote counts and is not diluted by someone who is not a U.S. citizen. Americans deserve that, because this question cuts to the very core of who we are as a country. To survive, a republic needs its citizens to know and trust that their vote is secure, that their vote matters, and that they can trust the outcome. People have died for the sacred right to vote, and that sacred right should not be diluted by non-U.S. citizens. And if Americans can't trust their elections, or who is legally allowed to vote in them, then they can't trust that their elected officials actually represent them. Yet somehow, congressional Democrats funded by George Soros and forever cowering to the radical left are ignoring the will of the American people. The minority leader tried to say this bill was a, quote, dagger at the heart of our democracy, even though the mayor of the largest city in the state he represents requires not one, but two forms of ID lying to all of us, and they know it. It's the same tired playbook they've tried time and time again. So let's unpack their arguments. You're going to hear them say this is Jim Crow 2.0. Yep, that's right. We have once again reached the point where Democrats claim the thing that they don't like is racist. It's wrong, it's insulting. And the Democrats know it. Everyone knows it, but they hope the American public won't notice. And here's why this is so wrong. What Democrats are really saying is that the 83% of Americans who support voter ID laws are all racist. And let's remember, it was the Democrats who passed Jim Crow laws, not Republicans. Everyone who is paying attention can see what they are doing. Democrats are openly calling most of America racist, and the mainstream media acts like that's normal. But the Democrats' attacks on hardworking Americans aren't done. If they call us all racist, they double down and say the Save America Act is an attack on married women. There's been a lot of talk recently about what is fair to women in America. The Democrats have said that the Save America Act is bad for married women. Liberals have also claimed that biological women need to shut up and accept that biological men can compete against them, shatter their dreams, sometimes their bodies, and steal their championships. Democrats somehow say that's fair. But you're not fair to biological women. And the most deranged members of the radical left have now convinced Democrats in Congress that it's okay to tell little girls that God made them wrong, then allow the mutilation of their bodies before these children can truly comprehend or consent to the consequences of hormone therapy or gender reassignment surgery. Now, I'm not a woman. I can confidently say that because, unlike the Democrats, I know what a woman is. And I'm married to an amazing woman. We've raised two incredible, smart, and strong women who now have families of their own. They're independent and can make decisions for themselves. They don't need anyone to tell them how to run their lives. I'm lucky enough to have one little girl in my life who calls me Grandpa. Even at 5, she's very comfortable telling me what to do. While not a woman, I do have pieces of advice for the Democrats. One, stop telling Americans that women can't figure out how to register to vote because you want to keep illegals voting. Women are smarter than Democrats think they are, much smarter. And 2, stop destroying women's sports by telling Americans that women can physically compete with biological males. Stop telling Americans that just because a little girl wears shorts instead of dresses and wants to hang out with the boys instead of the girls, that's okay to permanently disfigure her. It's disgusting, and every Democrat here knows it. But they are too cowardly to tell the truth to the radical lunatics running their party. Thankful, when we pass the Save America Act, we will end these dangerous attacks on women by Democrats for good. Look around and acknowledge what the Democrats are doing. They're saying to women, don't support the Save America Act. You'll never figure out how to register to vote again. Do you realize how insulting that is? You think I ever would look at my wife or my daughters or my granddaughter and think they aren't smart enough, or in the case of my granddaughter, won't be smart enough to do what they need to do? Now, I'm not going to stand here and let Democrats in Washington claim that these amazing, strong, smart women cannot figure out how to register to vote. This is nothing but a made-up talking point from Democrats because they want to allow, here's their goal, they want to allow illegals to vote. It's real simple. I'm tired of hearing Democrats use every excuse of the book to allow illegals to vote in our elections. Now, we all know that Democrats can't win on their radical ideas, so they have to try to weaponize our elections. That's wrong. Americans who are perfectly capable of showing their ID to board an airplane, visit a doctor's office, and prove their citizenship deserve secure elections. We are only here today because Democrats have created a system in this country that has totally failed the American people, and Americans want secure elections. We must make sure Americans can have the faith that their vote counts and that the election results reflect the will of the people. We must put simple standards in place that a majority of Americans approve of, and that will help Americans trust that our elections are free and fair. And why wouldn't Democrats want to make certain that elections in the United States of America are free and fair? We want that for every other country in the world. Why wouldn't we want it here? The fact is, over the last decades, Democrats' priorities are totally out of whack with what Americans want. Under the Biden administration, Democrats purposely opened our borders, and our country was flooded by illegal aliens. The same illegal aliens that Democrats are now putting above Americans as they do everything in their power to destroy this bill. Then, when Democrats saw how enraged the American people were about their wide-open borders and all the crime they were allowing in this country, the left claimed we needed new laws to fix it. As we all know, in the case of our border security, that was a complete lie. But for election security, we do need new laws because the ones we have aren't strong enough. And President Trump on his own can't secure elections. President Trump secured our border, and now Congress must secure our elections. The facts are simple. Illegal aliens should not vote in American elections. We know it's happening, and we must do everything we can to stop it. Democrats will say it's racism, but they say everything is racism when they don't like it. Is it racist that before I board a plane I have to show my ID? Is it racist that in order to buy certain medicines, apply for a job or a bank account, check into a hotel, rent a car, purchase a lottery ticket, order a drink at a bar, or get into the DNC convention, or shovel snow, for goodness sake, that we as Americans have to show ID? Absolutely not. And anyone telling you otherwise is lying. Here's my simple question for Democrats. Why should voting in our elections, something that dictates the direction of our country and is essential to building trust in government, have a lower ID standard than buying a six-pack of beer or a lottery ticket? The answer is simple. It shouldn't. When the minority leader isn't calling minorities and women too stupid to show ID and register to vote, he's claimed that we can't pass this bill because President Trump is trying to rig the elections. He's lying, and he's telling on himself. The minority leader and Democrats think that stopping illegal aliens from voting in American elections is rigging the system. Now, that's a remarkable thing for them to admit. But when they tell you who they are, we have to listen. What's clear to me is Democrats don't think they can win. They don't think they can win unless we allow people who are not legally allowed to vote to cast a ballot. Clearly, the minority leader is more concerned about what passing the Save America Act would mean for his future as majority leader than he is about election security, faith in our democracy, or delivering for the American people. Democrats, George Soros and the radical left will try to convince you that their opposition to this bill is about fairness and integrity. It's about protecting American democracy. Don't listen to them. It's not fair for illegals to vote in American elections. I don't get to vote in the French elections or the British elections or the Canadian elections. It's not fair to let men compete in women's sports. It's not fair to allow the mutilation of children with gender reassignment surgery for minors. The fact is that fairness, integrity, and our future are on the line. It's this bill that will protect them. It's what Senator Lee and I and so many others are fighting for today as we once again call on this body to pass the Save America Act. I urge my colleagues to support it. I yield back my time.
Mr. President.
The senator from Montana.
Mr. President, there's some issues we consider so logical and so obviously rooted in common sense that I gotta believe the American people are sitting at home and wonder why Congress is even having this debate. And such is the case with the bill the U.S. Senate is considering this week, the Save America Act. Let me be clear, the bill before us today requires proof of citizenship when registering to vote, and it requires photo ID in order to vote in a federal election. If you come to my office here in Washington, D.C., you'll see fairly quickly I'm an avid outdoorsman. There's a lot of hunting and fishing pictures on the walls that say a lot about the great state of Montana. As many know, Montana has some of the very best outdoor recreation in the country, even the world. Hunting, fishing, backpacking, you name it. I remember growing up in Montana, my grandpa and my dad had a fly rod in my hand when I was still a little boy, before fly fishing was cool even, back in the early 70s. I remember fly fishing before Brad Pitt discovered it with Robert Redford and made the movie A River Runs Through It. And do you know, if you want to fish in Montana, you want to fly fish, if you want to get a tag to hunt, you want to shoot a mule deer or an elk or a whitetail, you know what you need to get a tag, to get a fishing license? To go fishing, you need a license. And to get a license, you need a valid ID. Now, nobody has a problem with this when it comes to America's great outdoors. So why does the left protest so hard against ID requirements to vote? It is explicit law that only American citizens can vote. And all Americans have an ID or the ability to easily obtain one. The right to vote and participate in democracy is a core principle of this great country. It is what gives us our freedom. It's what gives us a voice. But when election integrity is compromised, our institutions suffer. And the people don't trust the outcome of elections, or it's so hard. I'll tell you why it's so hard. Our friends on the other side of the aisle are captive to their radical base. I grew up as the grandson of a Democrat in Montana. My dad was a Democrat growing up. But this is a different kind of Democrat today. The radical base is steering the party that we debate with across the aisle here in Washington. Remember, under Joe Biden's border catastrophe, at least 10 million, and that's a conservative number, 10 million illegal aliens poured into the country unchecked. And in many states, these illegal aliens are eligible for driver's licenses, which makes it easier to illegally register to vote. And that's why you need to have proof of citizenship. That's why the Save America Act is so important. Requiring a photo ID is basic. It's common sense. It's non-controversial. It's time to get this done. I'm very grateful to my colleague, Senator Mike Lee of Utah, and my colleague, Senator Eric Schmidt of Missouri, who've been fighting so hard to get this bill across the finish line. I urge the rest of our colleagues to get on board, support the Save America Act, stand up for election integrity, and vote for the Save America Act. Thank you.
The Senator for Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. President. There are moments when the Senate is asked whether it will merely manage decline or whether it will still govern. This is one of those moments. What is before us today is a test of whether the Senate still understands what it's for, a test of whether Article 1 of the Constitution still means what it says, that Congress possesses the power to write the rules of the road, a test of whether this body still exists to defend the American people, strengthen the Republic, and use constitutional authority for the common good. That is why I rise in support of my substitute amendment to the Save America Act. And it comes before us at a fitting hour in our nation's life. America is approaching her 250th birthday. We're taught in schools to think of the American founding as though it were unimaginably far away, sealed off behind glass. But 250 years is smaller than it seems. President John Tyler was born during the first Congress in 1790. He was born in the very infancy of this republic. President Tyler's last living grandson died only last year. That is how near the founding still is, and how recent this great experiment in self-government remains. And if the founding is that near, then our duty is that much clearer. We're not the curators of a dead tradition. We are the stewards of a living republic. Our republic was founded on a daring claim that free people could govern itself. Not that a free people could drift forever. Not that a free people could live off inherited greatness while its leaders refuse every hard question. Not that a free people could dissolve every boundary, mock every limit, and still expect to remain free. No, the American founding rested on a harder truth. Liberty is fragile, and so it requires structure. Man is fallen, and so self-government requires virtue. A republic requires citizens, truth, and the courage to defend both. That's why this bill matters. Some may say this bill will say these titles. Some will say that this bill and all of its titles don't belong together. That five-pronged, three-titled amendment is just a package or a wish list or a collection of unrelated priorities. But that only proves they do not understand what time it is, and they don't understand what our republic is. The five-prong and three titles of this amendment are united by one central question. Will American law still defend the basic conditions of self-government? Title I, Save American Voter, says the franchise belongs to its citizens and voting should be. Title II, Save American Sports, says that women's sports exist for women and girls, acknowledging biological reality over a legal fiction imposed by elite ideology. Title III, Save American Children, says that children should be protected from irreversible harm, not handed over to the appetites, fashions, and confusions of the age. Citizenship, reality, responsibility. Those are the basic truths a nation must defend if it intends to remain a nation. Let me begin with Title I. A republic has the right to distinguish citizens from non-citizens. That should not be controversial. That should not even be difficult. The vote is not a global entitlement. The vote is not a participation trophy for anyone who happens to cross our borders. It is one of the central privileges and duties of political membership. If citizenship means anything, it must mean something here first. That is why requiring proof of citizenship to vote in federal elections is foundational. It is a minimum requirement. It is so common sense in a self-governing nation because a people that cannot say who belongs to the polity cannot remain a polity at all. The same is true for voter identification. We're told endlessly that asking a voter to identify himself before casting a ballot is somehow oppressive, somehow unreasonable, somehow outside the bounds of democratic decency. The American people know better. That's why over 80% of American voters support voter ID. Identity verification is ordinary, in every serious sphere of life. We require it for small things, for lesser things, for trivial things. There's nothing wrong with requiring lawful voters to identify themselves before participating in the elections of those who will govern the United States of America. Honest elections require lawful voters, lawful ballots, and lawful verification. And then there's the question of mail voting. For too long, this country has been told to accept a system of mass mail-in voting as though it were the settled inheritance of the American Republic. It is not. In its current form, mass mail-in voting is a modern phenomenon, and in many places, it is a direct holdover from the COVID era. COVID is over. The emergency has passed. The extraordinary accommodations of that period should not become the permanent architecture of American elections. For most of our history, the presumption was simple. If you could vote in person, you voted in person. You appeared before lawful election officials. Your identity could be verified. Your ballot could be secured. The chain of custody could be protected. The people could trust what they were seeing. That is not cruelty. That is not oppression. That is what Republican government looks like. Now, of course, there are those who are unable to vote in person, and they should be helped. Military voters should be helped. Individuals with disabilities should be helped. Those who are sick should be helped. Caregivers with real burdens should be helped. Those with genuine, qualifying hardships should be helped. But accommodation should remain the exception, not the organizing principle of the whole system. Because voting is not a consumer transaction. The highest values in election administration should be on legitimacy, public confidence, and trust. Not so long ago, even Democrats shared these values. The Carter-Baker Commission, formed by former Democrat President Jimmy Carter and former Republican Secretary of State James Baker III, made many of the recommendations that my amendment promotes: voter ID, proof of citizenship, and limiting mail-in balloting. Democrat senators may not support these provisions, but their voters do. 71% of self-identified Democrats support voter ID. A free people should want its elections to be visible, accountable, and resistant to bad actors. That is what Title I is trying to restore. Not the denial of lawful voting, but the integrity of lawful voting. Not confusion, but confidence. Not looseness, but legitimacy. I know this issue because I have experienced these fights myself. When I served as Missouri's Attorney General, I fought in court and defended our state's election integrity laws against a coordinated assault from the left in 2020. The left's dark money-funded elections super lawyers did not merely challenge one rule here or there. They challenged the very idea that we can get serious rules to protect the ballot, deter fraud, preserve order, and sustain public confidence in the vote. They came for the safeguards that made elections credible. They came for the principle that absentee and mail voting must be governed by rules. They came for the simple proposition that the people are entitled not only to cast a ballot, but to trust the system by which ballots are cast, handled, counted, and certified. And Missouri won. We defended the truth that election law is the framework by which free people govern itself. Election law isn't the arcane inconvenience to be brushed aside whenever the left sees a tactical advantage. We defended the proposition that deadlines matter because finality matters. We defended ballot security because legitimacy matters. We defended verification requirements because public trust matters. We defended the authority of the people acting through their laws to insist that elections be honest, orderly, and worthy of confidence, and Missouri won. That fight has taught me something I've never forgotten. The fight over election integrity is about more than mechanics or procedure. Rather, it's about whether we still have the moral confidence to defend the elementary conditions of self-government. Because once every safeguard is treated as suspect, once every verification measure is denounced as oppression, once every effort to secure the ballot is caricatured as hostility to democracy, what is really under attack is the public's faith that elections are fair, lawful, and real. So when I speak today about voter ID, proof of citizenship, and limits on mass mail voting, I do so from experience. I've fought these battles before. I've seen the pressure campaign to dissolve the rules that protect the vote. I've seen how quickly common sense is denounced when it stands in the way of ideological ambition. I've seen when the public officials are willing to stand firm, and when you do that, you can win. That is what Title I and Saving American Voters is all about. It's not extreme, it's not novel. It's the restoration of an old and necessary principle that in a republic, the vote must be lawful, secure, and worthy of confidence of the American people. Now let me turn to Title II. If the law cannot defend women from men acting as women, it cannot defend reality. Women's sports exist because men and women are not the same. That is biological. It is moral reality. It's the plain reality on which fair competition depends. And when the law refuses to recognize that reality, the category of women's sports becomes fraudulent. Girls are told to surrender fairness. They're told to surrender privacy. They're told to surrender safety. They're told to surrender recognition. And they're told to do all of this so the ruling class can flatter itself for its own moral sophistication. The state has no right to impose that sacrifice. I have two daughters. They both love sports. But this is more than just about sports. It's about whether the law is still going to reflect reality or or whether it will be conscripted into enforcing a falsehood. It is about whether a civilization still possesses enough moral confidence to say, what is the truth? And that's not cruelty. It's about whether we still believe that girls deserve a realm of fair competition that is actually their own. A serious republic does not ask girls to bear the cost of elite confusion. A serious republic tells the truth about the world and builds laws on that truth. That is what Title II does. Now let me turn to Title III. A decent nation protects children. Children are not ideological property. Children are not experimental material. Children are not raw material for the ambitions of activists, for the cowardice of institutions, or for the self-indulgence of adults who've forgotten the law exists first to defend those who need protection. There are lines that a humane society does not cross. Irreversible medical interventions on minors for ideological ends are one of those lines. A child in distress needs guidance, protection, patience, love, stability, truth. A child in distress does not need a civilization so morally exalted. That is not mercy. That is not mercy. It is cruelty masked in liberation. A republic worthy of the name protects children from adult passions, from ideological capture, and from the fashionable madness of the age. That is what Title II is trying to do. And that's why these three titles belong together. Because this amendment is more than a list of 80-20 issues that the American people are demanding. The Save America Act is the defense of the elementary truths on which Republican life, small r, still depends. America belongs to its citizens. Men and women are real. Children should be protected from permanent harm. If a nation will not defend these truths, it will not defend truth for very long. If a nation will not defend these boundaries, it will not keep any boundary for long. And that brings me to this chamber itself. Americans still love Mr. Smith Goes to Washington for a reason. They love it because they still want to believe something about this institution. They want to believe that the Senate, a uniquely American invention, can be used for the common good. They still want to believe that conviction can defeat cynicism. They want to believe that a man can come here and fight for his country rather than merely manage its decline. Well, here's our chance to prove that hope is not foolish. The Senate is not a museum. It is not a visiting angels retirement village for proceduralism. It is not here merely to confirm nominees, pass omnibuses, and fund the legislative achievements of long-dead men while the living nation loses confidence in its own government. The United States Senate is here to legislate in defense of the American people. The Senate is here to draw lines. The Senate is here to make judgments. The Senate is here to govern. So the question for this chamber is really simple. Are we here to govern or merely preside? Are we here to act for the people or simply explain why action is impossible? Are we here to use power rightly or merely to congratulate ourselves for the restraint while the country pays the price? Because the stakes here are plain. We see distrust in elections. We see the collapse of moral clarity. We're seeing girls told to accept injustices as progress. We're seeing children offered up to the altar of extreme ideology. We're seeing a governing class that refuses to draw any line until the line has already been erased. And republics don't usually fall in one dramatic stroke. They weaken when truth is no longer defended. They weaken when citizenship is diluted. They weaken when institutions lose the will to govern. They weaken when elites ask ordinary people to live under conditions they themselves know are disordered. They weaken when men without chests hold positions requiring virtue and enterprise. That is what this debate is really about. It's about whether the country still defends first principles. It's about whether the Senate understands what time it is. It's about whether constitutional power can still be used for the common good. And as America approaches her 250th birthday, 250th birthday, that question becomes even more urgent. A republic approaching its quarter millennium should not be content merely to remember greatness. It should show that it still knows how to govern itself. It should show that it still has the strength to defend citizenship. It should show that it still has the courage to defend women. It should show that it still has the decency to defend children. Article 1 is supposed to be the branch of action. This body exists to do more than simply fund legislative achievements of long dead men. The legislative power exists to make judgments, draw lines, and defend our country. The Senate should prove that it still understands that duty. So pass this bill to restore integrity to federal elections. Pass this bill to defend women and girls. Pass this bill to protect kids. Pass this bill to show the American people that we can still act in the defense of the American people. Pass this bill because these are common sense reforms. Pass this bill because Americans are tired of being told that their most basic moral instincts are somehow beyond the pale. Pass this bill because a nation serious about the future doesn't apologize for governing itself. Pass this bill because America at 250 should be more than some commemoration. It should be a renewal. The age of excuses should end. The era of drift should end. The Senate should act, and the Save America Act should pass. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Senator from Missouri.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the next 60 minutes be under control of the Democrat leader or his designee, followed by the next 60 minutes by the Republican leader or his designee, and finally the next 60 minutes be the Democratic leader or his designee, and following that, the majority leader or designee be recognized.
Without objection.
Mr. President.
Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, you know, when it comes to broken promises, seems like Trump and Republicans have raised every price they ever said they would lower. Costs on groceries, with Trump's sweeping tariffs, the largest tax increase on working families in American history. They sent energy costs higher by canceling clean energy projects. They sent gas prices skyrocketing by starting a new war in the Middle East. And they let healthcare premiums skyrocket for patients, doubling, tripling, and more through sheer indifference. And now, desperate to avoid the wave of angry voters who Republicans had promised lower prices and no new wars, Republicans are even going to raise the cost of voting. Because their Save Trump Act would nickel and dime Americans who are just trying to vote, but have to slog through one new Republican roadblock after another. Under a Republican's bill, one of our citizens' most basic freedoms now comes with a price. And it comes with a lot of brand new hurdles that serve no purpose but to trip people up. Some folks will have to shell out for a copy of their birth certificate. Some will have to get a passport, and that's $165, by the way. Some folks will have to travel hours away to register in person, costing time and travel fare, or maybe gas costs, which Trump is now sending through the roof. And that is not the half of it. Just consider all the people who will face new challenges just to vote for no good reason. If you are a student who just moved to start college, Republicans will make it harder for you to vote. Because if this bill passes, you will need to show a photo ID and proof of citizenship in every single state. But a student ID won't count. Many tribal IDs also won't be enough under the new Republican restrictions. If you are a married woman who changed her last name, like me and the overwhelming majority of moms across the country, Republicans will make it harder for you to vote. Because you would now have to bring an ID, proof of citizenship, and some additional paperwork showing your name change. That could affect 70 million people. If you are a senior who just moved into a new nursing home and has mobility issues, Republicans will make it harder for you to vote. Because you can no longer just register online or by mail. You now have to show up in person to show your papers. Voting will also be harder for rural families, far from any place where they could show their papers and register in person. In Washington State, we have a lot of families who might have to take a ferry just to register to vote. Or heaven forbid, you're someone living abroad, maybe working for an American company or working at a nonprofit or even serving our nation as a diplomat. You might just have to buy a flight all the way back home so you can register. And the inconvenience doesn't stop at registration, because Republicans will make voting by mail harder for everyone as well. They are going to require you to photocopy your ID when you apply for that mail-in ballot. And then they are going to require another photocopy when you send in your mail-in ballot. At least as long as Trump doesn't get his wish to scrap mail-in voting altogether. And if you are someone who doesn't know where your birth certificate is, or doesn't have easy access to it, or if you are one of half of Americans who doesn't have a passport, that's 146 million people, you're going to have to pay fees and fill out a lot of paperwork. And what is the Republican plan for when the State Department gets flooded with record-breaking number of passport applications, by the way, because there is no money for surge capacity in this bill? What are Americans supposed to do when their paperwork gets delayed for weeks on end, or heaven forbid the president just slow walks it? And by the way, under the Save Trump Act, there's a perfectly awful chance that you do everything right and still get robbed of your vote by Republicans. Because this bill pushes states to rely on a DHS verification tool that just frankly is a dumpster fire. States that have tried this got results with huge errors, where DHS was wrongly saying many citizens were not citizens. The Trump administration tool has already wrongly advised states to purge lawful voters from their voter rolls. But the biggest problem with this bill goes to its roots, because the biggest problem is that Republicans' whole premise is built on a lie. Trump has been lying for years now about our elections, lying about winning in 2020, lying about winning in states like California, lying about crazy conspiracies that have been debunked time and time again. He's been debunked by Republican election commissioners. He has been debunked by thorough news investigations and carefully conducted audits. He's been debunked by million-dollar legal cases where other liars were sued for defamation. That has not stopped Trump. And instead of calling out the lies, like so many of them once actually did, first Republicans just started ignoring this, and then they started normalizing them, and now many of them are repeating these lies and conspiracies. Mr. President, our elections are free and they are fair. That is beyond question. Anyone who values our democracy should be shouting that from the rooftops. But instead of defending our democracy, instead of defending our elections from misinformation and conspiracies and a president who has stated quite directly he wants to take control over the elections, Republicans are joining Trump in the same sort of ruse he pulled to rile people up on January 6th. The biggest fraud here is Republicans who know their agenda is unpopular, Republicans who know that when entrusted by the voters to fulfill their promises, all they have done is break them, raising prices, starting new wars. Republicans who know they will not keep their majorities in a free and fair election, so they're pushing for this bill instead. Mr. President, this is not how elections work. This is not how America works. In this country, we fight for change with our voices and our votes. And if Republicans think for a second Democrats will let them take away people's votes, they better buckle up, because you can bet we will use our voices to block this bill for as long as it takes. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
President.
Senator from Minnesota.
Mr. President, I rise today to join my colleagues in standing up to protect Americans' constitutional right to vote and to fight back against this administration's most recent attack on access to the ballot box. Instead of making the case to Americans about policies and what you want to do and why you think it's important to have, say, the tariffs that in my state are wreaking havoc for our farmers with more yet to come, this legislation would actually be an end around of the voting process. This legislation would make it hard for a whole bunch of American citizens to vote, which appears to be the end game given what the president has said about it. By his own admission, he said that passing this bill will guarantee the midterms. That's not my quote. It's an exact quote from the President of the United States. The Save America Act will kick American citizens off state voter rolls. And how is this happening? Well, this is a complete invasion of the privacy of voters. It makes state secretaries of state give the voter rolls, the voter information, the voter data to the Department of Homeland Security, as in the same agency that brought us ICE, and then run that information through some kind of Doge-like system that's somehow going to spit back out to the states which voters they should kick off the voter rolls. Then the bill also creates these bureaucratic hurdles that make it complicated and costly for American citizens to register to vote or change their registration, particularly for the 69 million women who have chosen to change their name when they get married. Why should they be penalized? And millions of American citizens don't have the specific document required by this bill to prove citizenship, because this bill won't allow for driver's licenses anymore. You've got to produce other documents, like a passport or a birth certificate. More than half of Americans don't have passports, and they cost at least $165 to get. Birth certificates can cost $30. In my state, they're $24. And they can take tons of in-person time to obtain. Anyone that's ever had that experience, maybe for some other purpose, that you have to get your birth certificate, that's not always as easy as people think. And this bill also requires people to register to vote in person at their election offices, effectively ending proven and popular methods of registration used by millions of Americans in Democratic and Republican-led states all across the country, like online and mail-in registration. This would be a significant barrier for registration for millions of voters, especially for people in rural areas who have to drive hours to get that registration completed now. Rural Americans in many places would be forced to travel an average of about 4 hours round trip. And some voters in Alaska and Hawaii would be forced to take a flight just to register in person. This bill creates chaos, but maybe that's not the motivation of some of my colleagues. But I do believe it's the motivation of the president, who basically said, quote, "It will guarantee the midterms." It's designed to make it harder for American citizens, certain American citizens, to vote. It's designed to undermine mail-in voting and lay the groundwork for this obsession that the president seems to have with banning mail-in voting, while in some states it is actually the prevailing way that people vote, including a number of red states, as the presiding officer is aware. Because the administration can read the polls, they see that there is major concern in Americans with high costs. So instead of maybe passing a different bill, which we could call the Save America's Money Act, which would be doing something about these gas prices, when we know what's happened now, gas prices are up 30 or 40 dollars a barrel, $30 to $40 a barrel, and every $10 an increase for a barrel of oil is a $450 a year increase for the average American family. For the second time ever, the average price of diesel has reached $5 per gallon. Look what's happening with groceries. Electricity prices up an average of $110 last year on Americans' bills. Healthcare costs continue to skyrocket. So there's things we can do. We've got a bipartisan housing bill we just passed the Senate that need to get passed in the House. We have some permitting bills. I was long a supporter of Senator Manchin's proposals on permitting. We could get that done. We should be adding energy to the grid. This idea that somehow we're going to think that North Dakota wind is bad in a pretty red state and then ban grants that would have brought that wind, which was good for North Dakota and Minnesota, to Minnesota with a power company in northern Minnesota. That's one of the grants that had gotten singled out and I think has just recently gotten released. All that stuff are things that we could do to help Americans with their costs. So we should be working on the Save Americans Money Act instead of this. So I urge my Republican colleagues to change course and stand with us and stand up for the fundamental right to vote. That always used to be bipartisan. And the idea that you're going to make all these people re-register or register with a expensive passport or birth certificate, that they can no longer use their driver's license, that their private voter data is sent to Homeland Security to go through some Elon Musk designed computer system, is not what people want in this country right now. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
The senator from New Jersey.
Mr. President, the average price of a gallon of gas in New Jersey right now is $3.68. A month ago, it was $2.94. In that month, we've started a war with Iran, a war that this administration doesn't have a plan to end, a war that has cost 13 American lives and has injured hundreds of others. That is putting America's reliability as a partner further in doubt and driving up costs across the board at a time when costs are already too high for most Americans. Now, what are we doing about this crisis and trying to address it? What are we doing to drive down the costs that the American people are demanding that we take on? What are we doing to make it easier for Americans to pay their bills and to be able to provide for their families? We are here on the Senate floor today debating a bill that Donald Trump wants because he's afraid. He knows that he's at the weakest point of his presidency. His approval numbers are way down, and in a little more than 230 days, voters will go to the ballot box for the midterm elections. So instead of working to lower costs, instead of ending this war and getting gas prices down, instead of focusing on working families, Donald Trump has Senate Republicans here to peddle a bill because, in his words, quote, it'll guarantee the midterms. A bill, by the way, that, again, to quote Donald Trump, says, quote, supersedes everything else. A bill that Trump says he would, quote, close government to ensure it passes. So clearly we see something that is not that what the American people want to see get done, not of benefit to the American people at a time when they're demanding that we take on high costs of living, but instead something that's good for Donald Trump. So while you're cutting back on driving because gas prices are skyrocketing, and you're seeing prices at the grocery store go up because it's a lot more to transport food, and you're rethinking that vacation because the CEO of Delta just said airline tickets represents at its core is Donald Trump's extreme agenda when it comes to elections. It's an election that is built to, in Trump's own words yet again, quote, guarantee the midterms. Said that Democrats won't be able to win for 50 years if this goes through. He is saying the quiet part out loud about why he is doing this. And that's because his agenda has three core tenets. Number one, let the billionaires buy the elections. Number two, let politicians pick their voters. And number three, price people out of voting. Now let's start with the insane amount of big money in our politics today. Now, according to a report last year by the Brennan Center, the amount of dark money spent in federal races in 2024 was nearly $2 billion. That is hard to imagine, just unfathomable amounts of money being poured into our elections right now. It is nearly double what it was just 4 years prior in 2020. Now, that dark money represents a real threat to the integrity of our elections. A report published last month by the Campaign Legal Center highlights the way that the super rich can use our weakened campaign finance laws to basically bribe public officials. The report exposed the story of a man named Velutini, a Venezuelan billionaire who was charged with criminal bribery and was later pardoned by Donald Trump after his daughter gave $3.5 million to a Trump-supporting super PAC. These kinds of straw donor actions can take place when we have a campaign finance system that has been built for corruption. That's exactly what we're seeing. A system working exactly how it's supposed to, which is marginalizing the American people and average working families and lifting up the power of billionaires and corporations. It's a system that has been built so billionaires can buy the candidates they want. And if they get into trouble, they can buy themselves a get-out-of-jail-free card, literally. If my colleagues are concerned about election integrity, getting $2 billion of dark, corrupt money out of our system would be a good place to start, and I think you would find bipartisan support to be able to take that on. Now, the next place is getting rid of a system that Donald Trump has supercharged, where politicians get to pick their voters, not the other way around like the Constitution says it should be. Gerrymandering has never been weaponized like what we're seeing right now under the direction of Donald Trump. He's so afraid of losing the House of Representatives that he's threatened members of his own party who didn't want to go along with his plans. Just a few months ago, he targeted Republicans in Indiana, saying that, quote, anyone that votes against redistricting will be met with a MAGA primary. So we have a system championed by Donald Trump, that lets billionaires buy the elections and politicians pick their voters. So where does that leave you? Where does that leave the American people? Well, if this bill passes, it'll make it harder for people to be able to vote. It'll make it such that they have to pay for a constitutional right of voting, which is so sacred to our democracy. Voting shouldn't cost people extra money. It shouldn't require you to be able to have a poll tax. For millions of Americans, they'll need to potentially scramble to get a new form of ID. Now, maybe my colleagues will say, oh, just go get a passport. Well, look, a new passport costs $165, and to expedite it in order to vote costs much more than that. And we need to be able to deliver that quickly, so that's an added $22 on top of that. That's nearly $250 for your right to vote. That's nearly $250 when this administration has hurt our ability to get health care, be able to fill our tanks with gas, to be able to get groceries. They've made it more expensive across the board, and they've given massive giveaways to those at the very top. This bill will make it harder for married women to vote if their current legal name doesn't match the name on their birth certificate. How does that make sense? And it will make it harder for seniors and young people to vote by throwing up new restrictions on mail-in voting, requiring seniors and others to have to go and register in person when they haven't had to do that before. Why is it that we are trying to make it so hard for Americans to be able to vote? But then you realize that's the point. That's actually the point of this all. Trump wants it to make it harder for you to vote and make it easier for him to have his bidding. Why else did we see this happening right on the tail of so much of what he was doing and pushing gerrymandering so blatantly against our Constitution and our laws? Trump wants to make this more expensive for Americans to vote because that makes it easier for him and his supporters and his donors to be able to buy their way to power. He wants congressional Republicans to cease doing anything else and pass this bill so he can, quote, guarantee the midterms. Well, that's not what the American people want. They want a choice. It is their choice. They are supposed to be in the driver's seat of their democracy. The American people want our election to be secure. I want our elections to be secure. I want to make sure that voters can have full faith in our electoral process. I've been fighting for years to get dark money out of our politics, to reverse Citizens United, which I believe is going to go in the history books as one of the most dangerous moments of our democracy that has unleashed a torrent of dark money and problems and this nightmare that we're seeing ourselves in. I've been fighting to end the practice of letting politicians pick their voters since my first day here on the House side, and I even stood up to my own party in New Jersey by suing to fix a broken ballot that let power players pick candidates, not voters. This is not about partisanship. This is about delivering for the American people and preserving their ability to be able to drive our democracy. We have real work that we can do to make our elections safer, get rid of this dark money, and make sure the voters get to pick their politicians. But that's not the bill that we have before us. That's not the bill that Donald Trump is pressuring my colleagues here to push through. Instead, this bill is a distraction from Donald Trump's failures and a desperate attempt to compensate for the power he sees slip single day. That's what we're here for, and that's what they single day. That's what we're here for, and that's what they want us to do. Thank you. I yield back.
Senator from Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me, first of all, thank my colleague and friend, the senator from New Jersey, who I think has brought a fresh voice, incredible energy, somebody who's got a history as well of working extraordinarily well in national security issues. And I agree with virtually everything. This is a bit of a distraction. And I think was not to rehire him. He cannot accept the legitimate outcomes of the 2020 election. Despite officials from his own administration calling the 2020 election the most secure in American history, the president continues to promote unsubstantiated claims of voter fraud. And that's after investigations from multiple courts and states' attorneys generals and election officials from both parties, strongly declaring that there was no evidence to support allegations of substantial fraud. Simply put, the 2020 elections were certified, litigated, and affirmed. And tomorrow we're going to hear from some of the intelligence officials as our committee takes on the worldwide threat assessment, where unfortunately senior intelligence officials seem to be still focusing on relitigating the 2020 election rather than making us safe for 2026 and 2028. Because the truth is, after all these years, the president and his allies haven't been able to find any evidence of legitimate voter fraud in past elections. As a matter of fact, there have been studies ad nauseum that shows millions and hundreds of millions of votes, yet the number of people that were undocumented who voted by mistake were in the single digits. Now, they're looking forward to the effort that's on the floor right now towards suppressing wrongfully influencing future elections through this so-called Save America Act. Again, I know the presiding officer, my friend from Wisconsin, and others are going to say I'm going to go over the top. So let me just try to use the president's own words. The president's own words, and historically, I know the presiding officer comes from Utah, which has got a proud history of states' rights and local control. But the president's own words, he wants Republicans to, quote unquote, take over election administration, going as far as to say Republicans ought to nationalize the voting. If there's ever an Alice in Wonderland, up is down and down is up, that's what's happening. And again, and I don't know if this comment led to her firing, but before he fired her, the president's DHS secretary, Kristi Noem, pushed for the passage of the Save America Act while stating that her goal is to have the right people voting so we can elect the right leaders. I mean, this sounds like it comes out of some dystopian novel or 1930s advocacy. I don't get it. We all know that the strength of our democracy depends on voter participation and access to the ballot box. I've been doing this, I guess, long enough that I remember when registering to vote. That's because under the Save America Act, Americans who have voted for years, who've got no question about their citizenship, would have to go back and provide documentary proof of citizenship to register to vote in federal elections. And let me say at the front end, support voter ID. We have voter ID in Virginia. I don't think you should be able to vote without showing a legitimate ID. But under this bill, that so-called reasonable policy would put in place requirements that are so stringent that it would mean if you don't have access to the right documentation, like a passport, you won't be able to vote for the President of the United States. The truth is, according to the U.S. State Department, only half of all Americans possess a passport. That means if this bill passed, half of all American citizens would not be able to provide one of the primary acceptable forms of documentation that would be required to vote under the SAVE Act. Additionally, under this bill, states will be barred from accepting online and mail-in voter registration unless the applicant also presents proof of citizenship in person. So somebody who made the choice to change their name, who's now 85 years old and's got to go back and find a birth certificate or get a passport, and then has to show up in person to kind of get registered again, even though she's been voting for the last 50 years with no question about her citizenship. This effectively, frankly, guts online and mail-in voter registration process that are available across many states, creating, I think, an unnecessary burden for all voters, particularly rural voters, senior citizens, and individuals with disabilities. And disproportionately, I see my friend from California here, it has been states in the West, whether it is Oregon or California or Utah, that have used these tools to get more people involved. The fact is, these efforts don't make our elections more secure. All this does is disenfranchise millions of eligible voters. You know, my view is the goal of the SAFE Act is about cutting out voters and suppressing the vote than it is about saving anything going forward. Now, we're having this debate, and we're going to probably go through lots of procedural antics that most folks won't understand. I just wish that my Republican colleagues would come back to what I think we should be spending all our time on. If we're going to spend all night, let's focus it on funding TSA, FEMA, CISA, the Coast Guard. And frankly, I believe we need to fund all the folks at Customs and Border Patrol who aren't assigned to Interior immigration enforcement. So last week, Senator Murray and Senate Democrats attempted to say, hey, we got to debate about ICE. We got to debate about some of the CBP people who are doing domestic enforcement. If we can't come to an agreement there, let's fight over that. But let's not make sure that we hold all of these other folks hostage. Unfortunately, my colleagues, Republican colleagues, blocked 5 separate bills offered by Senate Democrats that would fully fund all of the components of DHS. And particularly, I think about our hardworking TSA officers who, thank goodness, you know, they did get a paycheck on March 12th with a partial paycheck, but now they're going unpaid. And the amazing thing is, this is kind of a crisis that doesn't need to be a crisis. The fact is, last July, my Republican colleagues voted to give Department of Homeland Security a slush fund worth nearly $170 billion. Of that funding, $75 billion was a blank check to ICE, providing the agency with a budget larger than most global militaries. I actually think the ICE budget is now bigger than the French military. I know it is bigger than the FBI's budget. You know, the truth is that $75 billion could actually fund ICE for the next 7 years without any additional appropriations. Now, I'm here today because myself and my Democratic colleagues are fighting to ensure that all the funding that is used for immigration enforcement will be no longer used in inappropriate ways. I think even most of my Republican colleagues have acknowledged that what happened in Minneapolis kind of went off the rails, that we're seeing ICE agents literally abuse and brutalize Americans and disrespect basic human dignity. You know, the unfortunate thing is, under this administration, ICE has been turned, frankly, into kind of a secret police that I believe has waged enormous violence against Americans. I know in my state that of the daily quota of people they have to pick up, 80 to 85% have never violated any other law than coming into the country, and most of them are going through an amnesty process that was set up. You know, we have seen the images of ICE ripping apart families, you know, arresting moms as they drop off kids to daycare. Matter of fact, I know that I tried to go do some oversight, part of my job. It took us a lot of hoops to get through to even do that oversight. I believe because of these actions, all our citizens are less safe. So we've got to do meaningful reforms to ICE. I don't think they're outrageous, like requiring body cameras, making sure that immigration enforcement officers show their face and identify themselves, and making sure that there's proper training in upholding traditional use of force standards. These are the same requirements that my local law enforcement have to deal with every day and for years. These aren't new. These are common sense, basic accountability measures that I said that our state and local police abide by.